Before we begin, if you enjoy true horror stories, unexplained encounters, and stories that linger long after they end, subscribe to this channel. New nightmares arrive every week. I grew up in a small place called Red Willow, tucked away in the high plains of the American West. If anyone's ever heard of it, it's probably because of an old roadside attraction that used to sit just outside town, a massive fossil replica that was eventually moved to a museum several states away. Aside from that, Red Willow wasn't known for much. There were a few hot springs out past the highway, an old rail line where a famous outlaw once robbed a train, and not much else besides dust, scrubland, trees, and a scattering of trailers. I was raised by my mother alone. She wasn't strict by any stretch of the imagination. Rules were flexible, and freedom was something she believed kids needed. But there was one absolute rule she drilled into me from the time I could walk. Never go near the trailer at the edge of town. Never talk to the man who lived there. The man's name was Harlan Pike. Harlan lived alone in a battered trailer near the northern shore of Ashen Lake, right where the trees started to thicken. He made a living digging through people's trash, pulling out anything he could sell, reuse, or repurpose. He only ever did it at night. And even when people caught him, most were too afraid to say anything. Everyone knew the same thing. Harlan Pike had killed someone and gotten away with it. My mother told me he was a monster. She said the person he'd killed had been a close friend of hers in high school. That was all she ever said about it, and I assumed the reason was simple. Some wounds don't heal, and some stories hurt too much to tell twice. As I grew older, I picked up pieces of the story from others. Harlan had volunteered for military service overseas. When he came back, he wasn't the same. He moved his trailer away from town and kept to himself. People warned kids never to go near the north side of the lake at night, joking nervously that Harlan might mistake them for animals while hunting. But not everyone spoke about him with fear. I remember riding in a car with a friend and his mother when his name came up. My friend talked about Harlan like he was the devil, but his mom just sighed and said, "That poor man just wants to be left alone." When my friend reminded her that Harlan had killed someone, I saw something change in her face, like a mask slipping into place. She snapped that we were to stay far away from that trailer, and the conversation ended there. At the time, I didn't understand why that moment stuck with me. By the time I was 17, Harlan Pike represented everything dark and hateful in my mind. One night, my mother had been drinking. Nothing excessive, just a few sweet drinks while watching old television dramas. When I came home, I found her crying over old photographs. One of them included the boy Harlan had supposedly murdered. She told me the full story then. Her friend had been out near Ashen Lake with other teenagers, drinking late into the night. At some point, he wandered off alone. That's when he saw someone moving through the trees, carrying what looked like a child over their shoulder. He shouted. The person ran. My mother's friend and the others chased him. When they caught up, the man dropped the child, turned around, and shot him. Multiple times. He died instantly. The child was taken to the hospital but died later due to massive tranquilizer exposure. Everyone there said the shooter was Harlan Pike. And yet, for reasons no one could explain, Harlan was never convicted. The story hardened into certainty inside me. Hatred took root. Months later, sitting around a campfire with friends, I decided I was going to do something about it. The plan was simple and stupid. I would sneak out to his trailer late at night and set it on fire. Not to kill him, at least that's what I told myself, but to scare him into leaving. I stole paint thinner from the school art room. One Friday night, I told my friends I was heading home and instead walked around the lake, cutting my flashlight once I saw the glow of his trailer. I waited, watched, listened. Eventually, the light went out. I crept closer, heart pounding, convinced I'd gone unnoticed, until I heard the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. "What have you got there, son?" I froze. He told me to drop what I was holding. When I did, his flashlight beam landed on the can. He told me to turn around. Said he wanted to see my face before he killed me. When he saw me, everything changed. He lowered the gun, said my name, knew who my mother was. He invited me inside. There, he told me what really happened. My mother's friend, he said, had been deeply troubled, expelled from school. accused of indecent behavior. Seen talking to children in ways that made parents uncomfortable. That night at the lake, Harlan had been hunting when he saw a group of drunk teenagers. One of them was carrying an unconscious child. Harlan followed them, heard what they were planning, and acted. He shot the man to save the child. He carried her back to town himself. She died anyway. And the others, the ones who had been with her, walked free. Harlan stayed away from town because he couldn't stand seeing them grow up. Before I left, he asked me to do one thing, tell my mother the truth, and ask her to look me in the eye when she denied it. I did. Our relationship never recovered. I haven't been back in nearly 20 years. Back in 2002, my boyfriend and I were driving from Lakeview, Illinois, to a small town in eastern Nebraska called Hollis, where his parents lived. Around noon, we'd been cruising through endless cornfields for hours when suddenly the corn just stopped. It was like coming out of a forest into an open field, except instead of green grass, all we could see was ash and charcoal. There had clearly been some kind of fire. My boyfriend said it was normal for farmers to burn fields sometimes to prepare for the next planting cycle, but it still looked creepy as hell. One moment, we could barely see a few feet on either side of the highway, and the next, we could see for miles in every direction. That was how it became so easy to spot the man and the little boy walking hand in hand through the burned-out cornfield. At first, they were far off in the distance, but even then the contrast stood out. The scene looked almost wholesome, like an older man taking his grandson out for a walk, showing him the land after a burn. As we got closer, I noticed they were headed toward what looked like an old well. I didn't mention anything to my boyfriend. We were enjoying a quiet stretch of driving, music playing softly, so I just kept watching as the scene came into sharper focus. By the time we were close enough to pass them, I could see them clearly. The older man was wearing dungarees and had dark, thinning hair on top of his head. The little boy wore a blue shirt and white sneakers, and his hair was light blonde and curly, almost white in the sunlight. And then, as we drove past them, I saw it, clear as day. The man picked up the little boy and tossed him down the well. I screamed, "Oh my God," at the top of my lungs. My boyfriend panicked immediately, asking me what the hell was going on as I frantically dug through my bag for my phone. I thought for half a second about telling him to stop the car, but an image flashed through my mind of us lying dead in that field, full of bullet holes. So I told him to keep driving. I told him a kid had just been thrown down a well. He hadn't seen anything. His eyes had been on the road. When I explained in detail, he asked if I was absolutely sure. I told him I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. When I finally found my phone and unlocked it, I had zero signal, so I grabbed our road map and found the nearest town. It was only a few miles ahead. I told him to step on it so we could get there and call 911. The first place we saw was a small diner right off the highway called Mason's Grill. We pulled into the lot, and I nearly fell running from the car to the door. Inside, every head turned as I rushed to the counter and asked to use the phone. The woman behind the counter agreed, and I dialed 911. As I explained what I'd seen, the entire diner fell silent. When I said I'd watched a child get thrown down a well, people gasped. The dispatcher told me to stay put so a deputy could be sent over. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I turned around and realized every single person in the diner was staring at me. Someone brought me a glass of water. While we waited, a man stood up from his table and approached us. He asked about the burned fields, then asked me to describe the man I'd seen. When I did, people exchanged looks. They said the man sounded like Caleb Turner, a local farmer. Someone mentioned his grandchild had been staying with him that week. The room filled with confusion and disbelief. Everyone seemed to know him well. When the deputy arrived, we spoke outside. I told the story again and got the same reaction, polite doubt. Then another patrol car arrived and the county sheriff stepped out. The deputy summarized my account for him. The sheriff listened, frowned, and walked away to use his radio. When he returned, he said they'd already contacted Mr. Turner. Turner denied everything. He did have his grandson with him, but they hadn't been anywhere near the burned fields. I begged the sheriff to take us back to the well so I could show him. He said he couldn't enter private property without permission. I tried to explain how urgent this was. If the well had water, the boy could drown. If it was dry, he could still be injured or trapped. The more frantic I became, the more they looked at me like I was unstable. Eventually, after a lot of pleading, the sheriff told a deputy to check the well. We waited. Finally, the sheriff came back with what he called good news. The well was empty, and Mr. Turner was on his way to the diner with his grandson so I could see for myself that everything was fine. I was speechless. I knew what I had seen. The sheriff suggested I'd been mistaken, an optical illusion caused by speed, smoke, and distance. Then the deputy returned. Behind him rolled an old pickup truck. A large man stepped out wearing dungarees, dark, thinning hair just like I remembered. He was angry. He demanded to know who was accusing him of throwing his grandson down a well. The sheriff tried to calm him. Then the man opened his truck door and helped a boy out. The boy had dark, closely cropped hair. My boyfriend whispered that everything was fine, but it wasn't. The boy I saw had light blonde curls. I tried to explain that it wasn't the same child. They told me maybe the sun had made his hair look lighter. I felt like I was losing my mind. The sheriff pulled my boyfriend aside. When he came back, he told me we had to leave immediately or risk being arrested for causing a disturbance. We left. Once we had signal, I called state authorities. I filed reports. I complained. Nothing ever came of it. I know what I saw. I've never hallucinated before or since. I don't need glasses. And no, I'm not crazy. My father used to work for the diplomatic service, and he met my mother while stationed in South America. My mother's cultural background has always been incredibly important to her, so things like traditional food and music from her home country were a big part of my childhood growing up. We only visited her home country once when I was a kid, so when I reached my late 20s, I decided to fly over again, this time to visit extended family and explore my mother's homeland properly. One day, I was driving along a narrow back road in a very remote area, trying to find the small town where my relatives lived. I was completely alone, surrounded by empty countryside, when I suddenly saw flashing lights in my rearview mirror. Local police were pulling me over. Not wanting to cause any trouble, I pulled over immediately and started mentally preparing to use my very rusty Spanish. But instead of the officer getting out of his car and casually walking over like you see in movies, he took a defensive position behind his open door and began shouting instructions at me through a loudspeaker. He ordered me to stick my hands out of the window. I was instantly terrified. I'd barely seen a gun in real life before, let alone had one pointed directly at me. I started shouting back that I was unarmed and scared, but he treated me like some kind of hardened criminal. He yelled at me to shut my mouth as he slowly approached my car. He shoved his gun right up near my face while trying to cuff me one-handed. I remember thinking that one twitch of his finger and my brains would be splattered all over the passenger seat. As this was happening, more police vehicles started arriving. Before I could fully process it, I was dragged out of the car and taken straight to jail. Sitting in that cell was probably the lowest point of my entire life. The police kept throwing around words like killer, predator, and someone who hurts children. One officer even looked at me in shock and said, "That's him." As I was walked through the station, I had waking nightmares about being locked up in a foreign country for something I hadn't done. Those thoughts were made even worse by officers periodically coming up to my cell to shout abuse at me through the bars. I kept telling them I was British and that I was only there on holiday, but they accused me of lying and threatened to shut me up permanently if I kept talking. This went on for hours. I genuinely believed my life was over. Then, without warning, someone unlocked my cell and told me there had been a mistake. Just like that, I was free to go. Walking out of that police station felt surreal. I was shaking uncontrollably, but the officers were either laughing about the mix-up or offering half-hearted apologies that didn't even begin to cover what I'd just been through. They acted like they'd written the wrong parking ticket, not hauled me in at gunpoint and accused me of horrific crimes. Still, I was just relieved to be leaving. I was furious too, but I didn't dare show it, afraid they might find a reason to lock me up again. Before I left, though, they showed me a photo of the man they had mistaken me for. He was a violent, wanted criminal, genuinely dangerous, and staring at his photo was like looking into a distorted mirror. It was easily the most terrifying experience of my life. Later, when I asked my relatives whether I was entitled to any kind of compensation, they laughed and told me there was no chance at all. I had an incredible trip overall, and I don't regret going, but I haven't been back to that country since. And if I ever do go again, my family will be picking me up directly from the airport. The worst day of my life was a Sunday, and it happened in a small coastal town called Harbor Creek, down on the eastern seaboard. Back then, Harbor Creek was home to fewer than 2,000 people and was your typical quiet, rural town. We had a small grocery store, a gas station, a fast food place everyone loved, and a local peanut processing plant. Aside from a handful of churches and chapels scattered around town, that was pretty much it. It was peaceful, neighborly. Murder wasn't a word you heard spoken out loud in Harbor Creek. It was something that happened somewhere else on the radio or on the evening news. But that changed one night in the early 90s when all that evil stepped right out of the television and walked our streets. It was the evening of early June. I was down at the Harbor County Sheriff's Office, about a mile south of town. The county jail sat on the same property. I'd just collected some paperwork from one of the deputies and was back at my desk, quietly filling it out, when we suddenly heard dispatch crackle over the radios. It was the quietest day of the week, so none of us were expecting anything more serious than a minor dispute or a fender bender. When the call came in coded for an armed suspect and multiple fatalities, there was a split second where I was convinced it had to be some kind of mistake. Then I saw my fellow deputies running for their cruisers. That's when I knew it was real. I followed them out into the parking lot, jumped into my patrol car, and we sped off in a rough convoy toward the grocery store on the north side of town. The place was called Lomart, a local favorite and, aside from the churches, one of the few places where folks regularly gathered and talked. Knowing that 3 people were already reported dead and that they were likely people I knew, or at least recognized, that realization hit hard during the drive. When we arrived, the store was closed and locked up. It always shut early on Sundays. We still had almost no idea what we were walking into. The 911 call had come from a wounded survivor. Whoever it was had been in so much pain that they couldn't give dispatch many details. All we knew was that there were bodies inside, a man with a gun, and people who desperately needed help. The front of the store was lined with large glass windows. As we approached, we could see a long trail of blood smeared across the floor, stretching from the front of the building toward the back. We forced our way inside and quickly discovered that the blood belonged to a member of the cleaning crew. He had been shot and had crawled all the way from the back of the store to the front so he could reach the phone. Once inside, we spread out, clearing the store aisle by aisle to make sure no one was waiting to ambush us. When we reached the back of the building, we found 5 more people. 3 of them were dead. Another was badly wounded with stab injuries. For reasons none of us could understand at the time, the 5th person, a member of the cleaning crew, had been left completely unharmed. There was nothing we could do for most of those who'd been shot. We focused on the survivors, doing everything we could until EMS arrived. Thankfully, both of them made it through. As paramedics worked to airlift the wounded to the hospital, we finally heard the full story from the one surviving member of the cleaning crew. The man who walked away covered in blood, but without a single injury. And it was every bit as horrific as we feared. Every Sunday night, a cleaning crew came in after closing to wax the floors and prepare the store for the next week. At 6 o'clock, once the last customers were gone, the store manager let the crew inside and locked the doors behind him. The crew started moving floor mats and getting their equipment ready when the last remaining clerk noticed a man she didn't recognize stepping out from one of the aisles. She assumed he was a customer who hadn't realized the store was closed. When she approached him and told him the store was closed, he pulled a gun and pointed it straight at her face. The cleaning crew was working near the front of the store at that point, and the man moved so quietly that none of them noticed what was happening. He forced the clerk toward the back office, while the rest of the crew remained completely unaware. Once inside the office, the gunman ordered the manager to hand over all the cash on site. He'd chosen his timing well, right at the end of the week. We later learned he made off with several $1,000s in cash, along with money orders worth a few thousand more. But instead of leaving, he marched the manager and clerk back onto the store floor and rounded up the cleaning crew as well. According to the survivor, the man grabbed dog leashes from one of the aisles and used them to bind the victims. He ordered them to tie each other up at gunpoint, then tied the last person himself. Once everyone was bound, the survivor thought the ordeal was over. The man had the money, everyone was restrained, there was no reason to do anything else. But he did. This was where things truly turned horrifying. The gunman began stacking people in pairs, ordering them to lie on top of one another. Before anyone could understand why, he said, "God forgive me for what I'm about to do," and opened fire. He managed to fire only a few shots before the gun either jammed or ran out of ammunition. Then he ran. For a brief moment, the survivor thought it was over. Seconds later, the man came back, this time carrying a knife he'd taken from somewhere in the store. He asked the survivor if he planned to tell the police. The survivor said no. So did the man lying on top of him, who turned out to be his own brother. The gunman lost control. He slashed the brother's throat from ear to ear and continued stabbing him in the back until the knife blade snapped off inside his body. The survivor told us the man asked him again if he would identify him to the police. When he answered no a second time, the gunman finally left with the money, leaving one man alive. The survivor believed the killer might return again, just like he had before. With his brother's body pinning him down, he couldn't have moved even if he wanted to. Eventually, the other surviving member of the cleaning crew managed to free himself from the leash. Believing everyone else was dead, he crawled toward the front of the store, phone in hand. That's where we found him. The investigation that followed consumed me. One of the victims was related to the county sheriff, and he made it his personal mission to bring the killer in. But from the very beginning, everything went wrong. The store's security camera system wasn't working that night. A repair technician had been scheduled for later that week. The timing still haunts me. All three survivors gave us the same detailed description of the killer: a crooked nose, hazel eyes. We circulated sketches, but they led nowhere. We received reports of a white sedan with out-of-state plates speeding out of town. The car was tracked down, but the owner was cleared. Wrong place, wrong time. The investigation eventually fixated on one troubling detail. One of the victims had asked the gunman why he was doing this. While she meant why he was stacking them, the man seemed to think she was asking why he was robbing the store. He claimed to be a former police officer who'd recently been fired. There was no evidence to support that. His fingerprints didn't match any law enforcement records. Some investigators believed he was military or law enforcement. Others, including myself, believed he was a fugitive who killed simply to eliminate witnesses. By the time that theory gained traction, the killer could have easily fled the country using the money he stole. Afterward, people in law enforcement talked about what happened like it was a natural disaster, something random and unstoppable. But I felt useless. The worst thing to ever happen in Harbor Creek, maybe in its entire history, happened while I was sitting at my desk filling out paperwork, while a monster stacked bodies and executed them two at a time. And the one thing I still can't understand is why he let the last man live. The survivor told us the killer looked him in the eye and said, "I'm going to let you live." Sometimes I think he was simply exhausted, unable to kill another person after what he'd already done. Other times, I wonder if he wanted someone left behind to tell the story, so he could read about it later, see the fear he caused. I try not to think about that. because when I do, it makes the fact that we never caught him hurt even more. I grew up in a place called Miller Township in rural eastern Pennsylvania. Now, Miller Township is about as rural as it gets, especially around a tiny community called Stone Hollow, where I spent most of my childhood. The area is home to a large population of Old Order Amish. And if you're thinking of the Amish who practice Rumspringa or use flip phones because they're considered essential technology, this wasn't that group. These were the strictest of the strict. They still referred to anyone who wasn't Amish as English, and that was my childhood living like we were outsiders in our own country. But I didn't know any better back then. That life was normal to me. I was happy, right up until October of 2006. Like most kids my age in that community, I dropped out of school after 8th grade to help my father work on the farm. That morning, my dad and I were working together in the fields while my little brother was supposed to be at school. Everything was completely normal. Just another day. Then my dad stopped what he was doing and said, "Is that your brother?" I looked up and saw a small figure in the distance running down the dirt road toward our farmhouse. Even from that far away, I knew it was him. Dad frowned and said, "What the hell is he doing out of school?" It was still late morning. We both headed toward the house. When we got there, my little brother was inside, crying uncontrollably while my mother tried to calm him down. Dad still assumed my brother had just run away from school and was gearing up to be angry. That changed when my brother finally managed to speak. He told us there was a man in his classroom, a man with a gun. That alone was terrifying, but it wasn't the worst part. As my dad rushed to grab his own firearm, my brother added something else. The man had chains and hooks. That was it. My dad didn't say another word. He took off toward the old schoolhouse and told me to stay behind and watch my mother and brother. We waited for hours before he came back. When he did, he told us what had happened. Just after the children returned from recess that morning, a pickup truck pulled up outside the one-room schoolhouse. A man stepped out and went inside. He asked the teacher if she'd seen a clevis pin out in the road, a metal fastener commonly used in farming equipment. Almost everyone in that area knew what one was. The teacher told him she hadn't seen one and wished him luck. The man acted strangely. He wouldn't make eye contact. He mumbled something and left. A minute later, he came back. This time, he had a pistol. He told everyone to do exactly as he said or they were going to die. At first, the teacher assumed it was some kind of robbery and told the kids to comply. But instead of demanding money and leaving, the man ordered all the boys, including my brother, to help unload items from his truck. They carried in tools, a shotgun, a stun gun, lumber, wire, chains, and what were later identified as metal eye hooks. While the man was supervising the unloading, the teacher made a run for it and managed to reach a nearby farmer who called 911. The man realized she'd escaped. He ordered one of the boys to bring her back, then began barricading the schoolhouse doors using the lumber and nails. When he was finished, he allowed all the boys and 3 adults, including a pregnant woman, to leave. Then he lined the girls up against the chalkboard, like a firing squad. Police arrived minutes later. An officer used a loudspeaker to beg the man to drop his weapons and let the girls go. Around the same time, the man called 911 himself and told the dispatcher that if police moved in, he would execute the children. He said this in front of them. The girls begged him not to hurt them. 2 even asked to be shot first, hoping it would save the others. He told them to be quiet. By late morning, a crowd had gathered outside the schoolhouse. Ambulances waited nearby. Everyone heard the gunshots when they started. My dad said the sound that came from the crowd when people realized what each shot meant was unlike anything he'd ever heard. A collective wail of grief. Police rushed the building. The man fired at them through a window. Officers returned fire, targeting only the window. When they breached the schoolhouse, they found him dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Later, it came out that he'd tried to call his wife before the shooting began. He left messages and notes explaining what he planned to do. His wife had even contacted authorities herself, hoping to stop it. She was too late. 10 children were shot. Only 4 survived. Some died at the scene. One little girl died in the arms of a state trooper. They were between 6 and 13 years old. At some point, the man switched from his pistol to the shotgun, even though he still had ammunition. Many believed he did it to cause more damage. The man's name was Daniel Cross. Everyone knew him. He lived nearby. He was a delivery driver who visited local farms regularly. He had a wife, children of his own. Investigators later uncovered disturbing details about his past and his mental state, including admissions he'd left behind. The schoolhouse was demolished within days. What stuck with me most wasn't just the violence. It was how people responded afterward. The community forgave him. They comforted his family. They attended his funeral. I understood forgiving his parents. But forgiving him? I couldn't. People said it was God's will, that it was in God's hands now. That prevention wasn't our place. That was when I realized I didn't belong there anymore. I left Stone Hollow not long after, and I've never gone back. Thanks for spending your time here. I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you did, feel free to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.